Attention, attention, attention! Allez, 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 allez!
No one saw him fall. No body was recovered. By the end of that day there was only a mountain, untouched, and a line that went nowhere. At nearly 9,000 meters, sound does not travel far. The wind flattens it, clouds erase depth. The summit shrinks to a narrow platform of ice where movement feels borrowed, not owned. Every breath arrives late. Every action takes longer than it should. Below, the face drops away into white space, steep enough that distance loses meaning. Up here, mistakes are quiet. They do not announce themselves. They simply remove the chance to correct them. There was still a moment when nothing irreversible had happened. Skins were off, gloves still on, boots planted. The board not yet pointed downhill. The descent had not begun. In that thin margin of time, everything that would follow was still optional. And yet, something always happens before the fall. Not the slip, not the fracture, not the avalanche. It happens earlier when a person decides that stopping would cost more than continuing. From the summit, the route below could not be seen clearly. The air was moving, the light was flat. The mountain offered no confirmation, no reassurance, just silence, the kind that does not argue back. So here is the question that hangs over that ridge, still unanswered more than 2 decades later, when you have already proven you belong at the top of the world. What makes you step forward anyway, into a line that offers no return? This is not a story about speed or skill. It is not about rebellion or spectacle. It is about a decision made high above rescue, where confidence feels like clarity and turning back feels like failure. If you stay with Ben's stories, this is where we begin. He was not drawn to Everest the way most climbers are. For many, the mountain represents a summit and endpoint, a photograph, a box checked at the limit of human endurance. But for him, Everest was never the destination. It was a canvas, a vertical surface where identity could be etched, not with flags or footsteps, but with motion. Marco Siffredi was born in 1979 in the French Alps, into a world of steep lines and winter silence. Snowboarding was not an escape for him. It was a language learned early, refined through repetition, and trusted more than words. By his early 20s he was already known in extreme freeride circles, not loud, not theatrical, but precise, calculated, comfortable on terrain. Most riders only studied from a distance. Friends described him as calm to the point of detachment. He did not chase crowds or cameras, he chased lines. Not just steep ones, but meaningful ones, routes that felt inevitable once seen. He believed that mountains offered answers if you approached them honestly, with preparation and respect. That belief carried him higher. In 2001, Marco stood on the summit of Mount Everest and did something no one had done before. He clipped into a snowboard and descended via the Hornbein Couloir, a long, steep gash cut into the north face of the mountain. It was not clean. It was not fast. There were sections he had to down-climb. Others he sideslipped with surgical patience. But he came down alive. The achievement echoed through the mountaineering world. Everest had been skied before, partially lower down, but never snowboarded from the summit itself. Marco had expanded the definition of what was possible. Quietly, without ceremony, he had crossed a line that many believed should remain theoretical. That success changed his relationship with the mountain, not because it made him reckless, but because it removed uncertainty. He had stood at 8,848 meters with a board on his feet and survived the descent. The death zone had not rejected him. The mountain had not closed the door. To Marco, that mattered. It suggested that Everest was not an exception to the logic he trusted everywhere else. Choose carefully, commit fully, and the line will hold. But in mountaineering, familiarity can be deceptive. Everest does not repeat itself. Conditions shift. Snow behaves differently. Weather rearranges reality overnight. The mountain does not reward experience, it merely tolerates it. When Marco began planning his return, the goal was clear from the beginning. Not another descent, not a variation, but the line everyone talked about and almost no one touched, the Hornbein Couloir, narrower than Norton, steeper, more enclosed. A chute so unforgiving that a single-edged failure would not mean injury, it would mean disappearance. Among elite climbers and skiers, It was spoken of in absolutes. The Holy Grail. The line you admired from afar, not the one you claimed. Marco did not speak of it as conquest. He spoke of it as completion. To him, Norton had been proof. Hornbein would be definition. He trained harder, prepared longer. He returned not as a tourist of danger, but as someone who believed he understood the terms. He believed the mountain had already accepted him once, and that acceptance, once given, could be earned again. What Everest would eventually teach him was quieter than that. The mountain does not remember you. By the time the expedition reached the upper camps, the signals were already there. They were not dramatic. Not the kind that end expeditions outright. No snapped ropes. No sudden storms tearing tents apart. Just the slow accumulation of friction that experienced climbers learn to notice and ambitious ones learn to rationalize. The season was late. Early September on Everest is not generous. Clouds built faster. Visibility shifted without warning. The mountain was still climbable, but only if timing stayed tight. Marco knew this, so did the Sherpas. Above Camp 4, fatigue deepened. Not the sharp exhaustion of panic, but the dull, unignorable weight that settles into muscles after weeks at altitude. Movements slowed. Reactions softened. Nothing was failing, yet nothing felt fresh. On summit morning, the weather did not collapse. It simply refused to cooperate. Clouds moved in layers, breaking and sealing again. Wind rose and fell without rhythm. The light flattened, erasing contrast. Depth perception, essential for reading snow texture, became unreliable. For climbers ascending, it was uncomfortable. For someone planning to descend on a snowboard, it was a warning written in plain terms. Sherpas noticed it first. They spoke carefully, not in commands, but in observations. The snow was unpredictable. The wind was building. Visibility would likely worsen. They reminded him of the line below. The Hornbein Couloir was not forgiving. Once committed, there were no safe exits, no wide runouts, no platforms to regroup. If something went wrong, there would be no way for anyone to reach him, no line of sight, no chance of retrieval. This was all known information. Nothing here was hidden. Marco listened. He did not argue. He did not dismiss the concerns. He had heard similar cautions before on other mountains, other lines. He understood the risk not as an abstract threat, but as a familiar calculation. And he had his own data. He had already succeeded once where most believed it could not be done. He had already felt the snow hold at this altitude. He had already proven, to himself and to others, that Everest could be descended under control. That history mattered. So did the psychology of return. Turning back on a first attempt feels like prudence. Turning back on a second attempt feels different. It feels like erosion. Like admitting that the boundary moved after you crossed it once. Like accepting that the mountain had not changed, but you had. From the summit, the descent line was partially obscured. Clouds slid across the upper face, thinning and thickening in slow waves. There were brief moments when the entrance appeared just enough to suggest a possibility. Then it vanished again. This was the decision point. No one forced him forward. No rule was broken. No partner depended on his choice. The mountain was not closing in. Time still existed. The option to remove the board, to descend on foot, to live with an unfinished line was still fully intact. But to Marco, that option carried weight of its own. The Hornbein was not a spontaneous idea. It had shaped the entire expedition. It was the reason for the season, the return, the risk. Walking away now would not just end a descent, it would rewrite the meaning of everything that led here. So he prepared. He adjusted his bindings with gloved hands, checked edges he could barely see, locked his boots. The Sherpas watched, understanding without speaking that this was the moment they would lose visual contact. When Marco pointed his board toward the cloud line, nothing dramatic happened. He did not shout. He did not hesitate. He slid forward and entered the white. That was the last confirmed moment anyone saw him. Once he disappeared into the cloud, the mountain closed behind him. There was no sound to follow, no movement visible from above. The Hornbein Couloir absorbs presence quickly. Its walls funnel wind downward and scatter noise into the ice. From the summit, The line looks deceptively clean, an elegant channel dropping away, but inside it, perspective collapses. Width narrows, angles steepen. What seems continuous from above breaks into sections that demand constant adjustment. In clear conditions, descent here is already a sequence of controlled compromises. Edge pressure must be exact. Speed must be managed without braking too hard. Balance is maintained not by force, but by anticipation. In cloud, those calculations lose reference. Snow texture becomes guesswork. Shadows disappear. The board reacts before the mind can fully interpret why. If Marco fell early, it would have been sudden, a misread patch of ice, a hidden rock rib, a moment when the board accelerated faster than correction allowed. In a chute like Hornbein, a fall does not end quickly. It converts forward motion into vertical loss, ricocheting between walls, accelerating until terrain decides the outcome. If he did not fall immediately, the danger shifted rather than eased. Further down, the couloir tightens, wind-scoured sections expose hard ice. Pockets of unstable snow sit where spindrift accumulates, waiting for pressure. Visibility at that point would have been minimal. The clouds that hid the entrance above likely thickened inside, turning the world into a narrow tunnel of white and gray. There is also the body. At that altitude, fatigue is not just tiredness, it is systemic failure in slow motion. Muscles weaken, reaction time lengthens. Small mistakes cost more than they should. Snowboarding demands constant micro-corrections, ankles, knees, hips responding in coordination. In the death zone, those responses arrive late. Even stopping is dangerous. To arrest movement in a steep couloir, a rider must dig an edge deliberately. Too hard, and the board skips. Too soft, and it slides. There are no safe places to rest. No wide shelves to regroup. Every pause increases cold exposure and oxygen debt. Others believe the mistake came almost immediately. There is no evidence to confirm either. The mountain kept no record. What is known is this: no tracks were ever found. Fresh snow fell not long after. Wind scoured the face repeatedly in the days that followed. Any sign of passageboard marks, slide paths, debris would have been erased quickly. Hornbein does not preserve history. It deletes it. If he was injured but alive, the outcome would not have improved. There is no line of sight into the couloir from below. No path for rescuers to climb up safely. Even in ideal conditions, accessing that face is considered impractical. In cloud and wind it is impossible. A stranded rider there would be alone, without communication, without shelter, without time. Oxygen deprivation does not announce itself. It dulls judgment. It narrows focus. Decisions become simpler, not smarter. If Marco survived the initial descent but became immobilized by injury, exhaustion, or terrain, the end would have come quietly. No struggle, no witness, just physiology completing its course. By evening, the summit cleared briefly. The clouds lifted enough to reveal the upper face again. The line was empty. No movement, no signal, no trace. He did not reappear at the lower rendezvous points. No radio contact came through. By the following day, the expedition accepted what the mountain had already decided. Marco Siffredi had entered a place where outcomes do not echo back, and Everest remained unchanged. Search, on Everest, is a word with limits. In the days after Marco failed to return, the questions came first. Then the quiet accounting: who had last seen him, where, at what time, under what conditions. The answers narrowed quickly, not toward clarity, but toward absence. No one had followed him into the Hornbein Couloir. No one could. From above, the line disappears almost immediately. From below, it is sealed by exposure and risk. There is no safe vantage point where a body could be seen, even if one were there. Teams scanned what they could. High points on the north face, breaks in the cloud. The upper apron when light allowed. Nothing moved, nothing contrasted. Snow fell again. Recovery was discussed only briefly. To attempt a descent into the Hornbein would have placed others in the same trap. Even highly skilled climbers cannot move freely there without perfect conditions. And conditions were degrading, not improving. No rescue doctrine justifies sacrificing more lives for a retrieval with no confirmed location. The mountain did not refuse the search. It made it irrelevant. As days passed, Speculation filled the silence. Some believed Marco fell early, near the entrance, where the slope steepens abruptly. Others thought he may have ridden deeper, perhaps hundreds of meters down, before encountering ice or unstable snow. A few suggested a small avalanche enough to sweep a rider away, not enough to leave visible debris afterward. There was no proof to support any version. Lack of evidence became the evidence. On Everest, bodies are often found years later, preserved by cold, reappearing when ice shifts or snow thins. Marco's never did. The Hornbein Couloir keeps what it takes. Its geometry channels anything that falls into places rarely seen and never revisited. For the mountaineering and freeride communities, his disappearance unsettled something deeper than loss. Marco had not violated the mountain's rules through ignorance. He had not underestimated the altitude. He had not lacked skill. His preparation was real, his experience legitimate. If someone like him could vanish without trace, then the margin between mastery and erasure was thinner than many wanted to believe. There was also discomfort in how the story ended. No final photograph, no last transmission, no confirmed moment of impact, just a successful summit, followed by nothing. In accident reports, certainty is a form of closure, cause leads to effect. Errors are identified. Lessons are extracted cleanly. Marco's death offered none of that. It resisted simplification. The Hornbein Couloir remains unclimbed by snowboard to this day. Not because it is impossible, but because it demands something few are willing to offer. Acceptance that there will be no recovery, no record, no correction if the calculation is wrong. In that way, the mountain delivered its own verdict. It did not judge Marco's ambition. It did not reward his skill. It simply removed him from the story and left the rest unfinished. What remained was a question that would not settle easily. At what point does pursuing the purest line become indistinguishable from choosing not to come back? That question did not stay on Everest. It followed everyone who studied the route, traced the maps, or imagined standing where he had stood bored at the edge. Clouds below, outcome unknown. And it still waits there, in the same place, every season. Mount Everest has a way of clarifying things, not in the moment, but afterward. From a distance, Marco Siffredi's story is often framed as extremity, the highest snowboard descent, the most dangerous line, the ultimate gamble. But stripped of spectacle, what remains is smaller and more human. A sequence of reasonable decisions made under pressure. A person acting consistently with who he believed he was. He did not go to the Hornbein Couloir to die. He went there because, to him, not going felt like a different kind of ending. On Everest, survival does not belong to the strongest, the boldest, or the most accomplished. It belongs to those who recognize that the mountain does not negotiate with identity. Past success does not accumulate credit. Confidence does not reduce consequences. The summit does not care what you have already proven. There is a moment in every high-risk endeavor when the hardest act is not commitment but restraint. When stopping feels like loss, even though it preserves life. When turning back feels heavier than continuing, even though it keeps the future intact. Marco reached that moment. And like many before him and many after he chose forward, his disappearance is unsettling precisely because it resists condemnation. There is no recklessness to point it cleanly. No obvious mistake to isolate and discard. Just a narrowing of options until one decision carried all the weight. That is why his story endures. Because it forces an uncomfortable truth. That skill can take you to places where judgment becomes the only remaining protection, and judgment is never immune to ambition. Some lines on Everest remain untouched, not because they are impossible, but because they demand acceptance of an outcome no one can control. The mountain allows attempts. It does not promise returns. Marco Siffredi's legacy is not a record. It is a boundary, a reminder that the most dangerous moment is not the fall, but the instant before it, when everything is still possible, and stopping is still an option. If stories like this matter to you, stories about quiet decisions, invisible margins, and the thin line between survival and disappearance, this is what Ben Stories is here to tell. And this is where his story ends.